Week two. Big deep breath before I get started here. Oh, I'm going to turn my ringer on. We're going to do things a little bit different today. I'm going to begin today's session by going ahead with the screen share. And I'm not going to discuss the course materials for today until after we do a reading. So what I'm going to read to you right now is a short story that I wrote several years ago, and this was for one of my master's classes. And so I'm going to read this to you now, and then we're going to discuss it. Okay, so here we go. A thick, suffocating grayness of low clouds and moisture settles on rooftops in the sleeping city. The row houses with their cement stairs and gray brick pillars sit isolated from the street by empty sidewalks. Their walls hold no color in the haze, only shades of gray. Storefronts closed, curtains drawn, lights out, and padlocks secure. Street lamps cast shadows that creep down the streets. Trees empty of foliage stand eerie and black against buildings, against the air. Their branches, like long, disjointed fingers, reach toward the moon, stretching to cover the light emitted by the lamps. Light shades fade into darker shades, blending with no visible distinct lines. The swings in the city park bend in the slight breeze blowing through the city, bringing with it the putrid smells of city waste and alley trash dropped from the backs of garbage trucks. Steam rising from sewer grates in the street mixes with the foul stench in the air, giving off a musty, visible quality. It is sickening. It is disturbing. It is unnerving that no people are moving about. There are no dogs barking, no cars moving down city streets. A few fallen leaves tumble down the pavement, making their way idly into nowhere. The breeze swirls and ducks into alleys and down side streets, searching for something it hears, but finding nothing. The streets are empty. The sound in this stagnant scene carries upon the wind an echo of profound sadness, whether for a misplaced toy, parent, or puppy. Its mournful edge cuts the air, piercing the night's grayness. It strains to be heard, yet no window opens to its sound. No mother hurries to soothe its noise. The desperation of the pitch raises. It decreases and increases with the breath of its deliverer, creating music harsh and cruel to the ears. It stings. It carries. It is the forlorn wail of a child stretching around a wrought iron fence of black flanking the corner house, 3 stories tall and dark. The tips of the fence posts are spearheads, reaching high into the night. The effect is formidable. The gate stands open, and inside, alone on the sidewalk leading to gray stone stairs, is a small child with braids, dressed in a white flannel nightgown, a faded image of Barbie on its front. Her feet are bare. Her chest heaves as she draws in a breath between sobs. Tears fall from her face, hitting cement, making small puddles of gray there at her feet and between her toes. She does not notice. Holding the handle of a small wagon in her grasp, she trembles, and the handle's movement brings creaking from the soiled hinges, caked with dirt and time. It is old, and its color, once vibrant red, has faded with rust and wear. This night, it appears black against the pavement. It is black, but for the splash of red. A Raggedy Ann doll sits there, staring from her coal-black button eyes, past the girl into the street. She sees the grayness of the city. It contrasts her smile and the brightness of her hair. She knows nothing of the blackness of night, nor her child's pain. The girl clenches the handle of the wagon. Her knuckles turn white there, her fear growing. The handle shivers in her grasp. Raggedy Ann's face hits the side of the wagon and her eyes stare blank forward. The girl does not notice. A deep pause for breath uncovers a sound. A rock. A footstep. The girl stops. Her chest expands and her cry becomes a shriek, drowning the noise. The street lamp burns bright on the opposite corner. It beams its light in the darkness of ash and emptiness, tossing shadows long and menacing down the city streets. A trash can lid crashes to the pavement. The girl looks in the direction of the sound. Something in the glow of the lamp moves. The girl drops the wagon handle, bringing both hands to her face. Her sobs drown into her fingers, sifting the sound, muting the tears. She breathes in, holding her breath for a second, then two. She sees nothing in the darkness, but hears the noise again. She hears it through her skin. It moves through her, harsh and textured, sending a shiver roaming throughout her body. Her head snaps back toward the corner, following the sound. The shadow begins as a triangular shape, taking form as the figure forming itself moves down the fence line. The shadow rises and falls as an unknown object of fear with a limp and a scrape. The girl's crying ceases. She is unable to cry. She sees the shadow. Bent and misshapen, unnatural for the presence of a man, his hunched posture, arms crooked, doubled at the waist, knees knobbed. Nothing about the man stands straight. He has a feeble appearance, as if a walking cane could only support his spindly frame. Shrouded in a black cape, thick collar turned up, covering his thin, wispy neck, a black trench coat reaches to his disjointed knees. His smoky gray hair, set under a traveler hat pulled low to his eyes, has the consistency of straw, resembling a witch's cap, crooked, all in black, somewhat gray. The color unsure and changing. The girl sees through the slats. He is walking, one slow foot in motion, then a drag of the second like a sack of rocks scraped across pavement. He moves, uneven, unstopping, nearing the corner. Sounds from her throat become screams, blood-curdling and soul-fed. No windows open. No mother hurries to her aid. Her eyes remain on the shadow as he peeks through the slats, finding the child who screams. She focuses and sees his eyes. He locks their sight, keeping her transfixed. The beads of his eyes are small, set in deep pockets, giving him the appearance of white eyes, albino eyes, against the shallow gray pallor of his face. They narrow at the sight of the girl with an arch of his left brow. The motion of his feet remains steady. The scraping continues. He stares between the slats, moving from one to the next, not letting the girl's eyes release from this fixated trance. Her pulse slows and steadies under his gaze. Her screams subside to whimpers. She does not move. He smiles, one side of his mouth lifting higher than the other. The thin lips part, and she hears a snide laugh escape their opening. Low, rumbling. It is not of this world. His right hand slides under his cape into the depth of his dark overcoat. His eyes never waver from their hold on the girl. He pulls an object from his coat that flashes under the street light. He holds it high above his head, with spindly fingers grasping the sheath as he nears the turn of the corner. She sees the knife. Red blood drips in the glow of the lamp. There is blackness. I am afraid to sleep. I see him now. I see him always. I turned that in as my assignment in one of my assignments in my memoir class that I took at Lindenwood University when I was working on my master's program. My professor, his name was Craig Schneider. He gave it back to me after he graded it, and he said to me on the side, where only I could hear, he said, "You need to submit this to a horror magazine." And of course I was like, I'm just a mom of six, right? Like, what do I know, especially about writing horror? But I took his advice, and with what I learned from those courses and the charts that I mentioned that we'll be looking at the end of the semester, I found a publisher who was willing to publish it. And this short story was the very first thing I ever had published. This was my entry into the world of, oh my gosh, my name's in print. um, it was published through Mockingbird Press in their monthly magazine. So that was pretty exciting. They are based out of Arkansas. I was very grateful for that experience. First time getting to work with a publisher, first time working with somebody wanting to edit my work. Um, so what I read to you now is the original manuscript that I've messed with some, and every time I read it, I know it needs more work. But that's okay, right? No work is ever completely finished. And that's the beautiful thing about our work is it's alive, which means it's never perfect, right? It's a beautiful thing. So, the reason I shared this with you is because what we're talking about today is memoir. This week's focus is memoir, which means this week's focus is you. So, with that being said, the assignment that Craig gave to us, which I wrote this assignment or this piece for, was to write about something that scared you when you were a child. That was huge, right? That was a huge idea because you're sitting there and you're thinking, first of all, I'm in a class with a bunch of people I don't know. I know you're going to make us peer review this, and I'm not comfortable sharing myself with people I don't know. Well, number one, that's illogical because you're wanting to be a writer. So I had to deal with that thought process too. I guess it's easier to share your work with people you don't see than with people you might see. Um, but I had to jump over that hurdle. So I went home and I thought about it, something that I was afraid of when I was a child. Now, if I'm going to be fully honest with you, I was a fearful child. So, as a matter of fact, until the last 3 or 4 years of my life, I've been a fairly fear-filled individual. Um, so I sat back and I gave it some thought, and I feel like there's a hair flying around my nose. It's probably one attached to my head. Um, so I sat back and I gave it thought, and what came to mind was the recurring nightmare that I had when I was a little girl. And so what I did was I went into my bedroom and I turned off the light, I closed the door, and I sat on the bed with my laptop. And in the dark, I made myself relive that nightmare and I typed it out as it played. And what was wild about it was I made myself experience what I heard, what I saw, what I felt, what I smelled, and what I tasted. I made myself experience that dream through my senses. It was a vivid dream. It happened night after night after night after night. And mostly this was after I was 10 years old, 10 to 12, especially. And then it lessened for a little while. But what's wild and crazy is in some files that I have from my first bachelor's program, which was in the early 90s, I was in an English class and we had to write a memoir piece, and I had written the same dream. And then I forgot about it. Like that was tucked in a file, and I found it all these years later after I had done this assignment the second time. And what was so crazy was when I came across it, I took the two pieces and laid them side by side, and they were so similar. And we're talking 20 years had gone by, maybe 15, but years had gone by from the time I wrote it the first time to the time I wrote it the second time. I'm that familiar with that dream. And it was hard sitting there in the dark by myself, lights off, just me and my laptop, walking through that dream that terrified me so intensely when I was a little girl. And I cried, but I poured myself into it. And that's exactly what Craig wanted us to do. Because we had been talking about writing memoir, and not just writing memoir, but digging into our most authentic self, digging into that which is hidden and deep inside of us that we don't necessarily want to share with others, that we can use as fuel for our characters, fuel for our stories. Those deep, dark places, we have to realize are very human emotions. You're not unique in the emotions that you feel. Most everyone hides their authentic self. And what's so wild and crazy about that is we're really not that different at our core. We all have fears. We all have shame. We all feel, happiness, sadness, all of these different things. We all feel these things. And so, but we start to think, oh, well, what will they think of me? And I don't want them to know this about me. And we pile on these layers of hiding, right? And we become very inauthentic individuals. Well, those of us that are writers, we have this like innate need to express ourselves, right? We need to write, we need to tell stories. But the thing about it is, to be the best storyteller you can be, you're going to have to tap into that well underneath the layers of hiding rocks that you have placed inside of yourself. You've got to dig in to that fear, dig into that shame, dig into those hard things, dig into the hate, dig into the regret, dig into the joy that you might not express, that you might keep hidden. We have to be able to dig in when it comes to authenticity and being our real selves in our writing, because we need to do that in order to fuel our characters and to fuel our scenes, to add those layers of, oh my God, I can't believe you actually said that, right? There was another class that I took in that master's program where our very first assignment was to write a fiction piece. And the assignment was to write something you've never written before and to just be bold with it, like to push yourself, to write something that is unexpected. And I was like, all right, I'm going to write something a little racy. I was like feeling a little cocky, right? Like I'm like, I'm all that in a box of chips. I'm gonna write this, and my teacher's gonna read it and be all, and maybe I'll get the note that says, "Hey, submit this to a such and such magazine," right? No, but that's not what happened. See, what happened was I got to class, and my professor says, "Okay, we're gonna read our pieces out loud." Now I had practiced this whole being authentic thing again. Oh, Lordy. And I'm looking around the classroom. Why was there 83-year-old grandpa man in my class? Which I've already told y'all about me and old people. Now that I'm an old people, but whatever. This was 15, 16 years ago. So I'm sitting in this class. I've got this really racy piece, which I'm not going to read to you guys right now. I could, but I'm not going to. I wanted to read the other one because it goes along with what we're talking about today. But I've got this piece and I'm looking around and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm just going to go for it because, courage, right? Authenticity, be myself, dadgummit. And I did. And it was well received. And Grandpa didn't fall out of his chair. Like nothing bad happened. There was no heart attack. No. But it sure was a hurdle for me. Like once over it, once past it, I went, it wasn't so bad, right? I got on the other side of that. I think I could do this again. And so I built up a lot of confidence along the way. But it really comes from being willing to dig into those hidden places, those things that we don't want people to know about us. But what we have to realize is that we all are doing the same exact thing in that area. And so when you, as a writer, are willing to dig in and put those things into paper, people are going to relate with your story. They're going to relate to you, the writer, and they're going to want more because you're willing to say something that no one else was. And Stephen King, in a video lecture that I show my Comp 1 classes, Stephen King said, be willing to say what no one else will say. Absolutely. And you can see that's worked for him, right? He definitely says what no one else is willing to say. So that has worked for him very, very well. And so I wanted to share The Echo of Alone with you. One other note that I would share with you that's really interesting to me is I did for a while, about 13 years ago, I was teaching psychology in a trade school environment, and I was teaching English as well at the same time, but I was also teaching psychology. And we came to a section on dreams, and I thought, you know what, let's do a dream study. And so they all chose a dream from their lives to do the dream study on, and I chose this one. I chose my childhood nightmare. And it was really wild to dig into the symbolism within that recurring nightmare, because what I discovered was this was my brain dealing with a trauma from my childhood. See, my grandpa died in 1982 when I was 10 years old. And the dream started when I was 10 years old. My grandpa died, and when he died, my dad kind of lost his mind. My dad did not handle the loss of his father well at all. And my home turned into a frightful place for me. I didn't feel safe there. I felt alone. And there were two lines in that piece where it says, "No mothers hurry to her aid." I wrote those before I analyzed this. And I realized that I felt abandoned by my mom during that time, where I was just dealing with this angry, hurt, bitter father. And I felt unsafe. It was very scary for me. And so this was my brain from the sleep study that I did, the dream study that I did, my brain dealing with that trauma in my life at 10 years old. Really wild. Anyway, so I'm really grateful that I wrote it out. And yeah, so we're going to jump into the course shell here, and we're going to pick up with some more information. Let's see, share screen. And we're going to go back. Here we are, back into the course shell. So let's go ahead and close that short story out. I did put that here under week 2, so if you wanted to read that again, you can. Of course, it says optional reading. There won't be any questions on the quiz about it, I don't think. So, but I am giving it to you as an example, and keep in mind, I understand as I'm reading through it, I'm like, oh, I want to edit that, and I want to change that, and but it's fine, right? It's already been published. Why am I worried about it? But anyway, let's get into talking about what else we need to look at this week. So under week 2, the explanation here, it says week 2 is all about you. This week, you will view the week 2 lecture, which is what I'm recording right now, and read from 2 of our textbooks, On Writing by Stephen King and No Plot, No Problem by Chris Batty. A short writing assignment of 500 words will be contained in the discussion thread, along with a reading quiz and a recap of the week's information. Get a jump start on next week by thinking now about what you want to write about for the semester project. Try to come up with 3 storylines that interest you, that live in your spirit, that are begging to be told. So start thinking about, because we're going to do this next week. What are 3 storylines that you're interested in perhaps pursuing? And we're going to narrow it down to 1 in the next few weeks. So the reading today, if we go to reading, lay it out. You're reading this week, not just today, but this week in On Writing. Here's one of my copies. I have like 3 copies of this. So I have one on my desks, one on a bookshelf. They're just everywhere. is pages 15 through 101. And that might seem like a lot, but I'm going to tell you this. If you're a reader, this is going to go fast for you because this is the memoir section. Stephen King, before he gives you advice on writing, is going to tell you part of his life story. And well, I don't want to color your perspective of it, so I'm just going to tell you this is the memoir part. And it's important to read when we're talking about memoir, right? And so I'm not going to discolor your thinking on that by giving you my opinion on that section of the book at just this time. And then also, we're going to pick up No Plot, No Problem. And our assignment for this week, our writing assignment for this week, comes from No Plot, No Problem. It's on page 117. So what we're going to do is very similar to what my teacher had me do years ago. However, this one just says, write the things that scare you. So we'll look at the actual prompt on Blackboard here in just a moment, but we're going to be writing a memoir piece this week. 500 words, no more, no less, on the dot, right? I have uploaded my piece in the discussion thread already. Perhaps we'll take a look at that in just a moment to give you an idea of what we're looking for, but 500 words, right? Again, remember I said that this is about getting used to following directions when it comes to publishing. Sometimes there's a word limit and publishers mean it. If you go over it, they're going to toss you out. If you go way under it, they're going to toss you out. When they say 500 words, it's often because they're doing a publication and they have a certain space they have to fill and it needs to be that length. And so we can't just go around going, well, it's what I want, right? Because it doesn't work that way. Because they can say, well, then, okay, bye. So we don't want that result. So if you look at the laying it out plan, it's got the readings listed there and the quiz and the discussion boards. So with that being said, I want to open up the discussion board and let's take a look at this. This comes from page 117 in No Plot, No Problem. So write about a time when you were scared. This can be from any stage of your life. Now, that's different from the assignment that I was given in my class. In my class, he wanted it specifically to be from our childhood. But we are going to go with what Chris Batty has here in No Plot, No Problem. So, any stage of life. Use your senses to pull the reader into your fear and your circumstance. This is to be 500 words. No less, not much more. When I wrote this assignment for a course in my master's degree program, my professor said, and I've already told you this, Daisha, you need to get this published in a horror magazine. Shocked is what I was. Me? Wow. Yes, me. And it became my first published piece after several submissions, other places. One took. What I've shared here as my discussion post is not that piece, though, I want to clarify. Mining fear is a beginning place for each of us. We are able to access our emotions more when we write from hard places and allow ourselves to be raw. And then I put apple, apple, apple. And if you watch the Rule of Apple video, you get that. Sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes things are too hard and we just feel like, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. Apple, 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 do it. Right? Get there. And if you have to apple it out for a little bit, it's okay. But push yourself. So put yourself into this. Close your eyes, feel it, taste it, touch it, hear it, smell it, mine it. Let it be raw. And keep in mind, and then I've got, all of our rules for our threads. Now let's take a look at the piece that I submitted. This is a more recent piece that I've written. This is 500 words on the dot. And I know that because I took some time to re-edit it yesterday. It was 687, and I took 187 words off of it. And so this is the result of that. It's always possible to edit your work. I thought it was a finished piece. No, because I realized I put 500 into the instructions. And so I thought, you know what? Well, I have to abide by that too. So as it stands now, it is 500 words on the dot. She couldn't handle encounters with him without drinking. The yelling in her face, his spittle flying and landing on her cheek, her forehead, her chin. Drool crept down his chin as he squeezed her arms tight and shoved her up against counters, up against walls, his hand at her throat, telling her to listen to him, to stop being so stubborn, telling her all the things she did or said that drove him to this behavior. He said it was all because of her and her inability to communicate. He left bruises and made sure not to put them in visible places. No rhyme or reason accompanied his outbursts. She spent all of her time at home walking on eggshells, never knowing what would spark his anger. He said, "You know what upsets me." She didn't. It changed every day. He told her she was ugly, that she was lucky he had married her. No one else would want her. After sending her to their room one evening, he followed her in and closed the door behind him. He ranted, spewing hateful words about how she failed him, how she didn't do things right, how she fought him at every turn. She never fought him, but it never mattered. And she cried. Nothing made sense. Her tears angered him more, and he leaned over her as she sat on the bed, dying inside, trapped. He squeezed her jaw and told her to listen to him, told her to agree with him, told her to tell him that he was right. She tried, but he said through gritted teeth that she was lying. She tried to get away from him. He held his hand over her mouth and nose while she struggled. He put his body weight on her and kept his hand over her mouth and nose. Terrified that she was about to die, she fought harder. The children were all in the house. She wanted to cry out to them for help. They couldn't see, but they could hear. She wriggled free, and he pushed her back down on the bed. He snarled. An evil looked down at her and covered her mouth and nose again, pressing her head into the bed under the weight of him. She wrestled free again, fighting for her life. As she tried to crawl away, he grabbed hold of her and came around the other side of the bed, pinning her shoulders down. Then, without a word, he turned and sat on her face, the full weight of his ass covering her mouth and nose. Oh my God. This is it. She stopped moving. No one was going to rescue her, and death was more welcome than the life she lived with him. She stopped fighting and waited for her breath to stop. She could intake none. She could exhale none. She just lay there wondering what it would be like to see the face of Jesus. Sorry. Now I realize I'm a little more practiced at this, and it's hard to read even the pieces that I wrote myself. But in order for our writing to touch others, in order for our writing to be meaningful, we have to be willing to cut ourselves open. We have to be willing to be authentic. We have to be willing to write what no one else will, to say what no one else will, to be bold, because only in doing so are we going to actually be effective with our writing. So I challenge you as you're thinking this week about what it is that you're afraid of, and then you work to craft your 500-word piece. I challenge you to be bold with it. If you're finding yourself holding back, ask yourself why. I can tell you I'll never judge you for anything that you write, and I would like to think that everybody in the group would be able to make that same call. I will never judge you for anything that you write because it's part of your story. It's part of what makes you who you are, right? And it's only when we're authentic and we really open ourselves up that we can be of service to anyone else. It's what makes our writing matter. It's what makes our stories matter, is that we pour ourselves into them. And so this week, we're reading King's memoir, and we're going to practice writing a brief memoir, just a piece, just a bit about something that scared you. All right? So describe that fear, describe the situation, use your senses, be bold. You have no fear of ever being judged by me. And I would like for all of us as a group to be able to come to that space where we realize that everybody in this group has different life stories. And all of the things that we go through, all of the things that are traumatic, all of the things that are hard, all of the things that we've experienced make us who we are. And perhaps you're one of those very fortunate people who's not really had any trauma in their life. Well, that's good, but that doesn't mean that something's never scared you. And maybe you feel like, oh, well, mine isn't very scary. But if it scared you, it scared you. So write about that fear, write about what that felt like to be afraid. Somebody's going to relate to it. So with that, I'm not going to hold you much longer for this week's little talk. Probably got a little longer than I meant it to, but that's okay. So that's my challenge to you this week, and that's our writing prompt for this week. So 500 words, no more, no less. Just gave you an example of what that is. If you have any questions, you know how to text me. It's 918-994-2324, or post those questions in the water cooler. All righty? All righty. See ya.